I awakened to the sound of cloth being torn. From the low growls that followed, I surmised that a game of Rip the Rag was in progress. Slowly I opened my eyes and stared out into the bright sunlight. At last the storm had passed, and from the sight of animals that played before me, it appeared that all was well with the world. Max, Georgette, and Taxi tugged at what looked like an old towel. Heather sat sunning herself, while Howard dug at the earth in the far corner of the compound. Lyle was wrapped around a ball of some kind, kicking at it with his hind feet. The scene was so inviting that for one brief moment I wanted to run outside and join in the play. And then I remembered Chester. My heart sank, and the thought occurred to me. Someone out there, some seemingly innocent frolicker, was really a cold-blooded killer. How could I play with a murderer, I asked myself, and who could it be? Who could it be? I cast my eye over each in turn. Georgette let go of the towel, and, merrily darting back and forth, nipped at Max's ankles. Sure, I thought, she has reason to be happy. With Louise out of the picture, she's got Max all to herself now. He didn't seem so miserable either, I noticed. How quickly his grief had spent itself. Well, why not? After all, if he had bumped Louise off, no one but Chester knew. A little poison in Chester's food, and there was no more need to pretend. Soon he and Georgette would run away together. Everything was going according to plan. Why shouldn't he be happy? And Taxi? I watched as he collided with Max's shoulder. He fell back onto the grass and rolled around, scratching his back. Max ran off with the rag, waving it in the air. Suddenly Taxi lurched to his feet, and, picking up the challenge, grabbed one end of the rag from Max. They tugged in opposite directions. How pleased Taxi must be, I thought, if he were the culprit. After all, he wanted so badly to impress Max, to be his best friend. And now, it appeared, he had given Max everything he could ask for, and more. And in return, he got everything he'd wanted too. It was not easy to forget Taxi's interest in murder by poison. How excited he'd been when he first mentioned it to Max and me. No, he might appear on the surface to be a little dumb, but Taxi was no dumb dog. The sound of scratching drew my eyes to Howard. What was he doing anyway? He seemed to be digging a hole. To bury a bone, I thought. Or perhaps something else. He kept looking furtively over his shoulder, as if he were afraid of being caught. My glance fell on Heather. How strange the two of them were. Perhaps Chester had been right. Maybe they were werewolves. I vowed to keep my eye on them. Suddenly Lyle sprang up and attacked a leaf that happened to blow by in the passing breeze. "Gotcha, you little devil!" he cried. "You thought you could escape the long arm of the law, eh? Well, take that! And that!" And he bludgeoned the poor leaf into a fine powder. He was an oddball, no question about it. I remembered his threat to Louise, and his words from the night before popped into my head. "Let's string him up!" he exclaimed as he ran off. Lyle was just crazy enough, I concluded, to carry out his threats. Murder would probably be as natural to him as playing with a ball of yarn was to most cats. Just then the door of the office opened, and Harrison stepped outside, coming my direction. "Hey, Harold," he called out cheerily. "It's about time you were up. You going to sleep all day?" "Woof," I answered. "Oh yeah? What kind of thing is that to say?" Well, frankly, I wasn't sure myself what I meant by it. He opened my door. "Come on," he said. "It's almost time for dinner. How about getting a little exercise?" Leaving my bungalow, I observed Harrison out of the corner of my eye. He was whistling now. His cheeks were puffed out and red from the force with which he blew the melody, such as it was, through his lips. Gee, he seemed happy, I thought. There was a twinkle in his eye as he patted my head and said, "Good boy, Harold." From anybody else, such good cheer would have been normal behavior. From Harrison, it was definitely suspect. What if he's the one, I thought. Maybe he's in cahoots with Dr. Greenbrier, as Chester had once suspected. Maybe they were doing some kind of awful experiment in their laboratory and... A shudder went through me as I thought of poor Louise and Chester in the laboratory of a mad doctor. I didn't let myself think about it any longer. Harrison went back inside, and I surveyed the scene before me. Georgette and Max had gone off by themselves, and Taxi was rolling on the ground, playing alone with the remains of the towel. It was at that moment I decided to take matters into my own paws. I remembered something Chester had once said to me when I had refused to go along with him to investigate another one of his little hunches. I promised him I'd stay home and think about it. Sure, he said. "You may think about it, Harold, but I'm the one who will do something about it." "What do you mean by that?" I'd asked. "Cats are doers, dogs are not. That's what I mean. I think you may be overstating your case, Chester." "Think what you will," he'd said as he walked away. "The fact is that I am the one who's trying to do something, while you, oh passive pooch, wrap yourself around your food dish and do nothing." Once more I felt the sting of Chester's accusations. Do nothing, I thought. I'll show him he's not the only one with a brain. And so, with gritted teeth and a sense of great determination, I set out to unearth the truth. I decided to start with Taxi, and I figured I'd catch him off guard with a direct assault. "What do you know, Taxi?" I queried. Taxi looked at me blankly. Perhaps that had been the wrong approach. I tried again. How are you, Taxi? Oh, hello, Harold, Taxi said as if seeing me for the first time. Some storm we've been having, eh? I asked him. Oh, I'm all right, I guess. What? Fine, thanks. There was a pause as Taxi and I looked at each other. You asked me how I am, and I'm telling you I'm fine. Oh, yes, I see. And how are you, Harold? I'm okay, I guess. You're welcome. Huh? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to say thank you. For what? For asking how you are. Oh, I said. I'm sorry. That's all right. Thank you. You're welcome. I looked at Taxi a long time. Suddenly, I couldn't remember what I wanted to ask him or why. Knowing Taxi, I decided was definitely one of life's more confusing experiences. You're probably wondering how I got the name Taxi. Taxi mumbled so softly that at first I thought he was talking to himself. Well, no, I wasn't really. Then I'll tell you, Harold. Thanks, I said, wondering when the dinner bell would ring. You see, I was once owned by these people in New York City who thought that when they took me out for a walk it would be cute to call, Taxi! People who live in New York City think things like that are cute. It's the air pollution that does it to them, I'd say. Anyway, for a long time, whenever they called taxi, I thought that they were really calling a taxi, so I wouldn't come. And the taxi drivers thought that they were calling a taxi too, so they'd pull up. So all the time they were getting all these taxis they didn't want, and taxi drivers were getting mad at them, and meanwhile I was wandering off down the street, because I didn't know they were actually calling for me. What happened? I asked. Oh, eventually I figured out that Taxi was my name, but by then I think they'd gotten bored with the whole thing. They bought roller skates and gave me to their cousin who lives in town here. Air pollution is a terrible thing, I commented. Taxi murmured, as he rolled over onto his back. Just then, I remembered why I'd started this conversation in the first place. Interesting, I thought. How neatly he'd gotten me off the track. Taxi, I want to ask you something. Oh, hello, Harold. Where were you on the night of, last night? I asked forthrightly. Huh? Your whereabouts last night, Taxi? My what, Harold? Your whereabouts! Taxi looked up at me as if his brain had just gone out to lunch. Where were you last night? Oh, why didn't you say so? He paused for a moment. Now I had him. I could feel it. In my bungalow, of course. Just like everyone else. Why do you ask? Oh, he was a slippery devil. But I wasn't going to be fooled so easily. I thought how proud Chester would have been of my investigatory skills. The truth now, Taxi, I said. Tell me the truth. Okay, he said. That's better, I replied encouragingly. I was in my bungalow. You said that already. I know. So why are you telling me the same story? Because it's true, and you asked me to tell you the truth, didn't you, Harold? Yes, I did. I could feel myself beginning to falter. I'm sorry about Chester, Taxi said then in a voice full of sympathy. Me too, I said, completing my falter. Want to play Rip the Rag? He offered. Downhearted, I began to walk away. No thanks, I called back over my shoulder. Maybe another time. Okay, Taxi called out lightly. Bye, Harold. And he returned to his tug-of-war with himself. Not feeling particularly encouraged by the results of my investigation thus far, I was almost ready to give up and go home when I saw that Howard had stopped digging and was now sitting next to Heather in front of their adjoining bungalows. As I approached, I watched their heads move up and down and couldn't help thinking how terrific they'd look on the back window ledge of an old Chevy. Good afternoon, I said. They stopped talking immediately and stared at me as if they'd been caught chewing on a leg of the dining room table. Neither said a word. I cleared my throat. Good afternoon? I repeated. They glanced into each other's eyes. No one spoke for what felt like a very long time. In a tiny voice, Howard finally said, Good afternoon. There was a pause. I decided to plunge in. Where were you last night? I asked. Not much in the mood for conversation at the moment, Harold, old chap. Frightfully sorry. It's just that we're... Now, Heather interjected crisply, cutting Howard off from saying another word. I had no choice but to plunge right back out again. Well, another time perhaps, I said. Yes, Howard said with a crooked little smile. Another time, Heather said firmly. And then, just to make certain I got the message, she added, Goodbye, Harold. Goodbye, I said, walking away and muttering under my breath. It was nice talking with you. Fortunately, I had no time to brood further over my lack of success, for I saw that Max and Georgette were coming toward me. I felt a little nervous. After all, they were prime suspects, and I didn't want to blow my examination. I considered how best to approach them. Clearly, they were too smart not to recognize a direct attack. No, with them, I reasoned, I would have to be subtle. I would work my way into it slowly, craftily, never letting them suspect what I was up to. Beautiful day, isn't it? I asked casually as they stopped before me. Oh, yes, replied Georgette. She smiled sweetly. Right you are, Harold, Max added. Well, speaking of what a beautiful day it is, last night certainly wasn't, so where were you? I was extremely impressed with myself. If only Chester could have been here, I thought, to see just how clever and subtle I could be when I put my mind to it. What? Max asked, pretending to be confused. I heard the dinner bell ring and saw Harrison making his rounds. Drat, what a time to be distracted by food, just when I had them on the ropes. I've forgotten exactly what we were talking about, but I didn't let that stand in my way. A likely story, I snapped. Georgette looked concerned. Harold, do you think maybe you've been out in the sun too long? She asked. An interesting ploy, I thought, trying to make me look like the suspicious one. Harold, pal, Max said gruffly. It's been terrific chewing the fat with you, but we've got to run. Chow time, you know what I mean? I do indeed, I thought. Any excuse to get away, eh? Think about what I've said, I told Max and Georgette as they started to go. I wasn't going to let them off the hook so easily. You know where you can reach me if you have anything you need to get off your chest. Max gave me a puzzled look. Just to keep me thinking he was innocent, no doubt. Sure, mate, he uttered. Anything you say. Oh, Harold, Georgette said then. There is something. Yes? Ah, confession at last. We're sorry about Chester. I'll bet you are, I thought. Just like you were sorry about Louise. But, thanks, was all I said. Hey, Harold, let's go, Harrison called out. Soup's on. As long as it didn't split pea, I thought. After checking my dinner out for any uninvited smells or tastes, I plunged in. I was starved, which was understandable considering the amount of energy I'd used up conducting a tough and unyielding criminal investigation. The only thing that had bothered me was that I'd unearthed no new evidence. What I had unearthed was doubt. Doubt in my mind that anyone at Chateau Bow Wow was the culprit, or indeed that a crime had even taken place. Perhaps Chester had conjured up the whole thing in his imagination after all. It was possible, after all, that Louise had run away, just as everyone had said, and it may have been just an accident that led to Chester's poisoning. Perhaps all of it, I reasoned, was the unfortunate result of Jill's carelessness. It was then that I noticed the writing on the bottom of my food dish. The letters were smudged so that it was hard to make out what it said at first. Boy, I thought, the least they could do is serve dinner in bowls you can read. I was definitely going to complain about the service. I strained my eyes and looked into the depths of the bowl. The last word was now. I had no trouble reading it because it was the only one that wasn't marked up. After a moment's consideration, I could see the first word was hello. The end of that word was messy, but hello it was. Of that I was certain. Because of all the black marks, the three words in the middle were much harder to decipher. But having hung out around Toby when he did crossword puzzles on the living room floor, I was pretty good at working my way around black marks. So finally, I was able to figure it out. With a great sense of accomplishment, I uttered my findings out loud. Hello, how's your tummy now? Fine, thank you, I replied silently, although my eyes are a little out of focus. I went to the water dish, thinking what a cute thing it had been for the food dish to say. Too bad it had been so hard to read, though. I thought of what a time I'd had trying to make out the word tummy. It was almost as if someone had tried to cross it out deliberately. Suddenly, my ears went up. I lifted my head from the water dish. What if? I asked myself. What if somebody had tried to cross it out? Again, I studied the bottom of my food dish, but this time with a new intent. How could I have missed it? This wasn't an old worn-out bowl, and these weren't random smudges. Someone was trying to tell me something. Looking at it this way, I saw a new message emerge. Hello became help. Howls became howls. The third word was a little hard to make clear, but I finally read it as out. Tummy had been smudged out entirely, and now was left as it was. Hello, how's your tummy now became help howls out now. The sky was getting cloudy. A low rumble of thunder made it clear that the day's sunshine had only been a brief respite from the storm. Help howls out now, I thought as I lay down to sleep. Help howls out now. What did it mean?